Sir, I've started recording. Hope it's okay with you to
Yeah,
record the fine. So we'll probably start the proceedings. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear students. Today we have a distinguished lecture by a distinguished person, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, a former ambassador to Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Libya, and Malta. As a career diplomat, Ambassador Anil has served in the Indian missions in Bangladesh, Mongolia, United States, Russia, Sweden, and Nigeria. He served in Moscow as a deputy chief of mission in the rank of ambassador. He was also India's ambassador to Libya, Jordan, and High Commissioner to Malta. He superannuated in 2016. He is a postgraduate in physics from Agra University and studied Russian history, culture, and language at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. As a visiting fellow, he conducted research on WTO and regional trading blocks at the Oxford University. He is a regular contributor and commentator on foreign and economic policy and education and interfaith dialogue related issues, West Asia, Africa, and Russia, and managing India's interests in conflict zones are his special areas of interest. He is associated with several think tanks and chambers of commerce. He has published papers in books as well as periodicals. Ambassador Anil is a distinguished fellow and head of the West Asia expert groups at the Vivekananda International Foundation, member of Governing Council, Raisina House and Usana's Foundation, India Forum for Public Diplomacy, Future Billionaire International Network, and India Japan Foundation. Visiting fellow and advisor at the Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs, at Nepal Institute of International Cooperation and Engagement. He is also the Secretary of Association of Indian Diplomats, former Ambassadors Group. Presently, Ambassador Anil is the president of MIICCIA, Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture. Recently, he also joined the International Advisory Council of the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII. He is also on the board of advisors of BRICS Chamber of Commerce and Asia Africa Chamber of Commerce, as well as honorary member of International Trade Council, Brussels. Recently, he has joined the National Cooperatives Development Corporation as advisor international and co-president as well. He is also the member of the All India Management Association, DMA, Oxford Cambridge Society of India, and serves on board of advisors at Peaceful Mind Foundation as well as Confederation of Education Excellence, New Delhi. As a peace ambassador, Ambassador Anil is closely associated with the interfaith dialogue, peace and harmony efforts in the society, especially through the unity dialogue by the World Congress of Religions, Kazakhstan. Ambassador Anil knows French, Russian, Spanish languages. He has his proficiency. Ambassador Anil, it's indeed our pleasure to have you at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. If I'm sure this is also your first interaction with the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. We once anticipated that the Ministry of External Affairs, when it has these distinguished lectures where it sends across the former ambassadors to different institutions across the country. We had Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, we had Ambassador Balkrishna Shetty, we also had a few more ambassadors coming and discussing and interacting with our students. So we anticipated your name as well, but then the COVID scenario came in and that could not happen. But we still are in touch with the Minister of External Affairs, and in the future we look forward to. Sir, to your information, and you are aware, you have congratulated us. We also have the Wana Gazette, West Asia and North Africa Gazette as well, which is completely done by the students, and master students are trained in that one from one batch to the other. So far, it's going good, and we are in the progress of making it much more prudent, and we are also trying to take it to elsewhere, and with cooperation from people like you, will certainly be able to do. And today's lecture, especially, is very important from two perspectives. One for the class of India's foreign policy, and the other one is from the India's worldview class. In terms of India's foreign policy, the title was kept keeping in mind because of the changes that have come after 2014. India's dehyphenation with regard to foreign policy. India has also shed its unfounded fears that it used to be having for a very long time since 1947. And India has changed dynamics and the way it has been able to handle most of the states in West Asia, though we still continue to have problems, was the thought behind keeping this one. And you have gracefully agreed to deliver this lecture. So it's a pleasure and great honor to have you here, sir. So on behalf of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, I warmly welcome you, sir. Over to you now.
A very good morning, Professor Kishore, for that kind introduction and setting the stage for the discussion. It is indeed a great pleasure for me, and I was definitely looking forward to being there personally to interact with the students because there's nothing like that. But then we are in the pandemic phase, and I think that we'll have to wait a little longer. I must also congratulate you once again for an exceptionally good Vana gadget that you and the students are bringing out. It focuses on the key issues of the time and really puts things into perspective. So today's topic, even though it's peculiarly targeting the India's policy in the West Asia and changes and challenges and which way it is going forward, I think I would like to also give a little bit of a background on exactly what is happening in West Asia because the policies always depend on the development and they have to respond to the issues of the times, the difficulties that one faces, especially in a region as important as West Asia for us. I have often believed, and we still continue to hold this thought, that from our perspective, West Asia is possibly even more important than our immediate. And therefore, I hold great regard for the region, the developments there, and the way things have moved for us. We have possibly missed out certain times, which I'll bring out in my topic. But now that we have caught up rather fast, but still new challenges are emerging nearly every day. There are newer actors, and I would say that what we are seeing in West Asia, which is full of complications and complexities and hotspots. So we see the interplay of the aspirational competition and contestation and the role of the major powers, which is like US, Russia, Turkey, and China, apart from the regional powers like Saudi Arabia, Israel, UAE, and Turkey. So they all have changed their policy, they have all changed their discourses, and those discourses obviously tend to have a much greater impact on how India is going to react or is reacting in that sense. As you know, that it has an uncanny distinction of having the largest number of hotspots and prolonged conflict. It has also remained a key contestation for major global powers due to its strategic location, hydrocarbon reserves, petrodollars, huge sovereign wealth funds, authoritarian regimes, large lucrative market for defense and deadly arms and ammunition, and above all for trading routes that are vital sea lanes for security and commerce. So keeping all these trading lanes open is a very major security imperative for India as well. Since most of our listeners today, audience is from the international community, I will not go into great details of the thing which you already are aware of, but I will speak of the trends that have had an impact on these issues. As you know, during the Cold War period, the West Asia also became a part of the. I mean, you'll be. Sometimes we tend to not think about when we are looking at the region now that before 1979, Iran, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, all three were on the same side, and so was Turkey. But today, the situation is entirely different. Once in 1979, we had the Iranian Islamic regime came to power. Then obviously there was a greater contestation. And when you're looking at the West Asian landscape, you will have to actually consider three or four factors, apart from the geopolitics and the geoeconomic of oil. What is important is there are geopolitical contestations, there are geoeconomic contestations, there are geo-religious contests in the region. And we have seen that Saudi Arabia and Iran have been contesting on the Shia-Sunni divide. At the same time, they are also working together in maintaining the religious leadership in the region. Saudi Arabia, as you know, the king is the custodian of the two holy mosques, and Iranian, uh, they are following the Shia pattern and wants to have it. But Iran has, although equally rich and important country, strategically and connection-wise, connectivity-wise. It has also used, in my view, 3H, which are giving it an asymmetrical advantage in the region, especially with its Arab neighbors. And he has continued to maintain good relations. So those 3H are: number one is Houthis in Yemen, and you know that the Yemen war currently going on in Iran has an important role to play. Then you have Hamas, which is in Palestine and Gaza, which has been also an equally important part of the whole dynamic between Israel and Palestine. And then you have Hezbollah, which is present in Syria and Lebanon. So that gives it an advantage, and that's why the Americans and the other partners are trying to woo Iran in order to bring about that. Now we have seen the three wars that happened between on the West Palestine, 1948 and 1973 and 67 wars, and that has we have seen what happened at that time. Those problems that Israel is sitting on a huge amount of the Palestinian land. It is nibbling the lands through its settlements and has defied many of the international agreements which it has gone into itself. And that is something that has continued to create a major problem between the Arab world and Israel for a very long time. Even though bilaterally some of the countries had started interacting with Israel, but on a collective basis, the Palestine remained a very major issue for a very long time. And this was precisely the case for India as well. After the Cold War, India also started looking towards US, started looking towards the changes. And as you know, in 1992, and I was handling the desk at the time, we established diplomatic relations, not established, upgraded rather, because the consulate used to be there. And we had recognized the Israel earlier, and the UN initially not being on board, but then eventually we recognized. But we upgraded the relationship to a diplomatic level in 1990. And 1992, when we were doing it, at that time, we had discussed with that time President Yasser Arafat, and he was extremely happy about it. And he says, I am so happy that India is now normalizing relations with Israel because we are also continuing to talk to them, and we hope that you can bring about a certain normalcy in the relationship or act as sort of an interlocutor. Of course, we did not do that for certain reasons. And so I find that the Palestinian issue continued to prevail for a long time, apart from our own international interest in procuring oil and gas from the region with regard to our diaspora there in the region and their security, the remittances, the trading links. And so India continued to predicate its relationship with the Arab world, especially the Gulf countries. And as far as the Israel is concerned, we continue to have maintained relationships, especially in the defense and the security areas. But every time our relationship, as was mentioned, was actually hyphenated. When we had tried to dehyphenate the relationship between between Saudi Arabia and Iran, because we wanted to maintain relations with both sides, and both were equally important for us. But if you were to come to think of it, you will realize that the relationship was purely transactional for a very long time. I was surprised when I took over as the Joint Secretary Gulf in the Ministry of External Affairs in 2008, that we have not had any high-level visits after Mrs. Indira. And those of you who follow West Asia would realize that the people there depend a great deal on the personal relationship. So while we have had the visits of the Saudi king in 2006, the Qatari Emir in 2005, and the Iranians a year later, we had not had our prime ministers or even presidents going to the region after Indira Gandhi. And that was something that was shocking. So the first thing we started doing was repairing on this particular. Now, let me briefly tell you why it was not happening. That is very important, and that I firsthand not only saw while working from Delhi, but firsthand when I posted in Jordan. When I was being posted to Jordan, then I went and called on our president, Mukherjee, and he told me, he says, Anil, you are going to an extremely important and a strategic country. So I started smiling, and he asked me, he said, "Why are you smiling?" I said, "Sir, if it was so strategic, it is so important, please tell me why we did not have a visit of either a prime minister or the president or even a foreign minister to this country. Why is it that our joint commission, which was there, had not met for 9 years, even though we had set it up? And why is it that we are not even inviting them to come to India, even though King Hussein had come to India and he had a great regard for understanding? But King Abdullah also wanted to come. The fact remained is, the short answer was, they are very close to Pakistan. So Pakistan factor and the Islamic factor continued to play on the mind of the Indian policymaker, which is not so well recognized. So while we were buying, they were our largest suppliers of oil and gas. We had a large number of Indians. Today, there are about 9 million. They were sending about $50 billion, something like that, to us. They are also equally important, very few people know, as far as the food security of India is concerned. We get the largest quantities of our fertilizers and phosphate and the potash from this region, whether it is Jordan, whether it is Egypt, whether it is Morocco, or for that matter, Tunisia or some other countries. So this is why these countries are so very important. So it was basically a buyer-seller relationship, which continued to happen for a very long time. I mean, most about 40 years. So in 2008, we tried to start interactions with them, and we tried to take Prime Minister Manmohan Singh at the time to Oman, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, Vice President to Kuwait and several other countries, and their leaders started. And then, if you were to think about it, one of the key problems for us was that most of the fugitives from India, whether they were economic fugitives or criminals, like Dawood and others, they all used to find a great refuge in the countries in the Middle East. And we were unable to do anything about it. So the security aspects of it, it was extremely difficult to pursue at that time. And they did not look at India as a security provider. They looked at India as a great country, a country they could have better relations. They had P2P exchanges. There was historical civilization linked with almost every country. Indian rupee was a tender for a long time. So they were looking at India only as a market. And some places, when we tried to attract them to invest in India at the time, our policies did not permit. Like they wanted to invest in real estate, in the hospitality sector, in the Indian markets and all, because they wanted a certain specific rate of return on their uh, investment. That was not forthcoming, but still a beginning was made. And terrorism was one of the most important areas of our, especially because of Pakistan, because that has been perpetrating, and the Saudi Arabia had been involved, and so were other countries from the region supporting one or the other militant groups until Al Qaeda came on the stage. And we saw what happened. Afghanistan is a very clear example. It is not part of our discussion today, but Afghanistan is very closely linked to West Asia, even today, as they are evacuating from there, or the Americans are looking to have the over the horizon capacities to counter terrorism and ISIS, which is thrown back there. So our issues are basically with the region has been through the non-alignment, have been through bilateral exchanges, but we had it was they were all missing a major link, and that is what we called today as our strategic part. Now, when we talk to strategic, it is become generally very loose word in many senses, and sometimes you tend to think of strategic word as okay, just you want to give a relationship something special to say. But in effect, I would say that strategic you can call a relationship when there are mutual concerns of security, when you are dealing with the newer challenges jointly, when you are looking at terrorism as a common problem, when you are working on cybersecurity, when you are moving your collaboration from usual domain of trading and investments into space, into nuclear, and into today's time and age into the healthcare sector also. That has become a great uh, requirement of the day. And therefore, what we are seeing now is with these countries, we had tried to move our relationship because we knew that they will continue to support Pakistan, and Pakistan will continue to uh, to create problems for us, especially indulging in cross-border terrorism. And then the question of OIC, which is Organization of Islamic Countries at that time, now they call it Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Now, that one where India, if you remember, those of you who study would remember that in 1969, India was invited to come and join uh, the OIC in Morocco, Rabat, and our delegation was led by President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad. And after some time, the Pakistani president went there and he pleaded with the Saudi, with the Moroccan, and the Jordanian king. And they said that if India is on the same table, I'll not be able to show my face. And therefore, all the three requested India to stay out of it and to get the observer status, which we declined completely. And the Indian delegation returned. Since then, OIC, which is the after the United Nations, is the largest grouping, has been continuously used by Pakistan to carry on propaganda against India, issue every year these statements against Kashmir and Kashmir against India, about human rights in India, about creating a contact group, and all kinds of things. The Pakistan has used that singularly. So very often we used to talk to our friends in the Middle East, especially the Gulf countries, because it's located in Riyadh, the OIC headquarters. And all the people used to tell in the discussions that please don't worry about that. This is a Pakistan's routine thing, and they continue. And since it has to be something which has to be passed by everybody, in a sense, so everybody is quietly just put away. Please don't get upset. We know what you are. So until then, this was the issue. But let us come to 2014, after 2008, and then there were changes started. And when Prime Minister Modi came to power, there was a general feeling among the Arab world that given his close relationship with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu of the time, and their involvement in agricultural sector, in technology and others in Gujarat state, he becoming the prime minister, and generally the BJP was more inclined towards Israel, that the relationship with the Arab world will decline or will become simply matter of fact. So that was something that was in the minds, playing on the minds of all the major countries in the region, as far as India was concerned. Had that happened, you can imagine that Pakistan would have got a greater shot. But then the good sense prevailed, and we, uh, Prime Minister Modi actually visited first country was UAE, which now he has done 3 times. He went to all the Gulf countries, major Gulf countries, and had good relations with everyone. More importantly, I mean, in these countries, if you are following one by one, whether it is UAE, whether it is Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, or so, you will realize that in every country we have a strategic partnership. We have growing defense partnership with this country. With UAE, today is our third or fourth largest trading partner. All these countries have started investing a great deal. Like, for example, when Prince Mohammed bin Salman came to India, he announced that they will be investing about $100 billion. The UAE, for example, has carried on with a $75 billion investment. During the pandemic, still they continue to invest in. Now, their investments have also not only been in the routine areas, but also in the strategic reserves for India, in creating, meeting our requirements. That, and then, if you come to think of it, they, for the first time in the UAE, an Indian company, Indian consortium, was invited to also participate in the oil blocks by ADNOC. And they are making refineries, they are into. Of course, these things take time, but then they have realized the worth of it. Now, on the other side, security side, I would say, what was the real change which we witnessed? The change that we witnessed was that earlier it used to, even extradition treaty existed. We had the mutual legal assistance treaties with all the countries. In order to get any of the offenders or refugee or these fugitives, it would not happen in the first. But today that has changed. Today they are able to immediately. I mean, we have been now. You know that this Modi is Nirav Modi and all those people are still in those island states. We have not been able to get them. But within Gulf countries, we were able to get many of the big ones. Of course, Saud has been still defying, but many of them have been returned to India in record time. That has never happened before. Then we started having defense exercises, which we did not have before. The naval exercises to the air, and we first time had the visit of our army chief to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. In the space sector, because probably the UAE has ambitious plans. The UAE is also continuing to go. I mean, they launched on their own space program, and India's ISRO has been helping them. So there is with individually with every country, we have carried our relationship in a more strategic manner, which is how I would look at it. Now, one more aspect of it is which was never there before, and that was that when Pulwama happened, India made the Balakot strike. Immediately after that, we saw Mohammed bin Salman come to India. He had gone to Pakistan, and then he came to India. But you'll be surprised that normally we don't like the visits. Anybody coming to India going to Pakistan, we wanted these to be standalone visits because India did not wish to be equated in that. So what happened is Mohammed bin Salman went for a day back to, I think he was in the UAE, and then next day he came to India. He did not come directly from Islamabad. That was respecting India's wishes. Secondly, during that, whether it was Article 370 abrogation or whether it was Balakot strike, they appreciated India's strike. Of course, none of these countries want India or Pakistan or India or China to be at war because then they will be forced to choose between the two, and that might be a very difficult issue. And you have seen that Saudi Arabia has called on Pakistan last time to even refund and the encashment facilities that provided for import of oil and all. Of course, consumed recently. The UAE, when they had hosted the OIC, a foreign ministers meeting, for the first time, the Indian foreign minister, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj, was invited there. So when she was invited, we have seen that Pakistani foreign minister was extremely upset about it. He protested and he did not even attend the meeting because he was told by the Emiratis that in case you have reservations, you can opt out. So you can imagine the asking from 1969 to 2019, there has been a sea change in our relationship with these countries. As far as Palestine is concerned, Mahatma Gandhi had very clearly mentioned that as France is to the French and the UK is to the British, so is Palestine to the Palestinians. And following that policy, initially we had not even recognized Israel, and we had even voted in the United Nations against the partition of Palestine. But that happened. Thereafter, India in 1950 recognized Israel. But we always maintained that even when we had a relationship in 1992, we continued to tell them that you must resolve without having the heft. We were only conveying our message. But our preference was very, very clearly in favor of Palestine for a very long time. So when we had, I invited Prime President Mukherjee to come to India to Jordan for his very first visit. So he came to Jordan, then he went to Palestine, then he went to Israel. Similarly, if some minister went to Israel, he will go to Palestine. So that was the just to balancing acts that were there. So eventually, India had to follow a different kind of thing because the whole world itself was changing. It's not only us. We cannot be holier than the Pope. So obviously, we took the position that we will dehyphenate. And that's what the dehyphenation means, that both the relationship, whether it is with Iran or Saudi Arabia, whether it is between Palestine and Israel, will stand on that. That does not mean that India has given up its principled stand as far as our relationship with Palestine is concerned or cause of Palestine. Among all the outsiders, India is probably the only country that continues to maintain that there should be a two-state solution, that there should be dialogue, and there should be whatever between the two countries they can decide so that the Palestinians and Israelis could live happily side by side. There has been some minute changes in our statements over time, which observers and researchers like you will definitely understand and get. On the other hand, what we are seeing is with Israel, we have we have not criticized them openly, but we have personally in meetings always told them, A, they need to start dialogue. They are very unhappy about it because the only country that has some control over Israel is United States. No other country has that kind of situation. So we keep telling them we are against these settlements because that is changing the ground situation. And therefore, India always maintains it. It's not that we are not saying that. And those of you who have followed the fight for Hamas-Israeli war a few months ago, you must have seen that India was at that time president of the UN Security Council. And during that period, India played a very key role in bringing about statements, and India's statement was very clear. Of course, we could not have a UN Security Council resolution for the simple reason because Americans were not keen. The current Biden administration is not interested so much in resolving the situation or getting entangled into the Middle East. It is following the same what has been done from Obama downwards, that it is a retraction move from the region. But I personally feel that America is going nowhere. It has the largest numbers of bases. And it is now carrying on with its strategic move towards Indo-Pacific, no doubt about it. But then, if you come to think of India's perspective, how do we look at Indo-Pacific? For us, Indo-Pacific also includes part of West Asia and, of course, East Africa. So, from our perspective, that is an extremely important region, not only bilaterally, with our multilateral partners. If a part of the Quad, a part of anything else, then it is obviously very. But before Biden, I would say that the important thing that happened is by President Trump that you must have followed. President Trump, even though he was very erratic in his approach, he believed in diplomacy, but he was heavily invested in the region, even though I would say that rather he had misplaced emphasis, which led to the blockade of Qatar, and which was lasted for 4 years. It was only over in Alula summit last year. This was, you probably know that Qatar was blockaded by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain, and UAE for about 4 years. And it only started changing once the new Biden administration. What we have seen is that Trump was invested in the sense is when he visited Riyadh, he tried to talk to people, but he did not have a background of the international politics or the relations. He was probably not even aware that they have the largest base in Qatar in the region. And therefore, we saw that there was a major problem that happened between these countries in the name of terrorism, but eventually he tried to solve it. And he used to have a son-in-law called Jared Kushner still there, who became his deal man. And then they started something called Deal of the Century, as far as Palestine is concerned. Of course, it was a one-sided approach. It was where the former U.S. ambassador to Israel was part of it, drafted it, and therefore it had to be a one-sided kind of thing. That everything that is taken away becomes there. He even declared Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel de facto, moving their embassy there. He even said that Golan Heights are now not part of Syria, but now part of Israel. So he had created such a major problem. But in the process, as you know, that Israeli security remains a paramount interest of U.S. foreign policy in the region. That is always the case, irrespective of which administration is there or which government. Of course, Netanyahu had a very abrasive style of working. He was very hawkish in his approach, and he could cause more problems and conflict, and was not at all keen on the issue of doing anything to resolve this. So what we are seeing now is that the Abraham Accords that he worked on were something that was a great contribution to some kind of a peace and stability. The Arab countries, in the meantime, had started talking about this. They were having a relationship with Israel in one way or the other, but nothing was in the open. We did not know about that. So Abraham Accords, in my view, was one of the biggest changes that happened, and that had an impact so that the Israelis and Arabs started talking. Of course, in the beginning, it was signed between Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi and Manama, Bahrain. And then it moved on to Morocco and Sudan, and some other countries will be joining. One of the most important countries whose approach will be deciding factor would be Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia is not able to join or recognize Israel openly, even though they have excellent relations and security domain, because of the leadership of the Islamic world that Saudi Arabia enjoys, and therefore they cannot compromise. Now, is it true that the Abraham Accords have been widely accepted? I don't think so. It is leadership's decision, but whether on the street, the Arab street is still not happy about it. So therefore, resolution of the Palestinian issue remains a very important concern. And that's what India continues to mention. Now, in the Arab world itself, there is a churn which is going on, and that churn actually started more happening from the time in 2010 when the Arab Spring happened. Now, the Arab Spring, when it happened in Tunis, it was actually a natural uh, outpour of the feelings of the people, their frustration by a 42-year-old archaic government, autocratic government, which was not looking after the people at all. So this was something that they were extremely upset about. And therefore, I think that, but within 20 days, when they saw that Ben Ali, who was there in power for a long time, had to run away from the country. The French and the Americans and everybody thought that it was more of a problem of law and order. And then we saw that thereafter they went to Egypt, and we saw then finally there was a military intervention. And in my view, since I was ambassador to Libya, I have seen it that the revolution in Libya initially might be following the same pattern as Tunis, but with the intervention of the French and the Americans and the NATO, it became a project for regime change. And that was what thereafter we have seen what happened in Syria, and it is continuing. Had the Russians not come back into Syria, we would have seen that Assad would have gone longer. The Russians also were shortchanged when they were in Libya and in the United Nations Security Council. And most of you know that we were also, at that time, 10 years ago, in 2010, 11, we were part of the Security Council. And therefore, we had abstained on this vote. And that is what cost us a lot of our own national interest in the place, especially the economic interest and some of the political will. That was eventually repaired. Today, Libya once again is trying to have its elections on December 24th. Hopefully that will happen. But there are a lot of ifs and buts in these things. Most of the Arab world continues to remain in Islam. But these Gulf countries, which are rich kingdom, they obviously was forced to engineer and introduce various economic reforms because they realized that it is not, cannot be the business as usual. So therefore, you can see in Saudi Arabia, a lot of reforms taking place. In UAE, another kind of a set of reforms that are taking place. They're trying to integrate the world, trying to get out of the costly war. Like the Saudi Arabia is unable to carry on with the Yemen war too long. So it wants a closure of it. And that's where now what we are seeing is today, fortunately, a lot of these countries who were traditionally been opposing one another, whether it was between Saudi Arabia or Iran, they are talking now today, trying to come about some kind of modus vivendi with one another. Or it is between Turkey and Saudi Arabia or Turkey and UAE. As we talk today, actually the UAE's crown prince today is in Turkey and having meeting with Erdogan. And this is a very important visit in that country. Then we had problem with Egypt and Turkey, and Egypt and Qatar. So now every country in the region, seeing that the Americans are trying to retract and what they have done in Afghanistan, leaving it just high-handed one day, they are looking at other countries. So which are the other countries? One is internally they are trying to work out some kind of even if a small level cooperative mechanism which could bring about some kind of a regional security architecture. They're working on that. But on the other hand, they are also talking to China. Now, China, under the radar of the American security, has expanded itself immensely into the Middle East, starting from Iran to Israel. They have this Belt and Road Initiative you must have heard, and that is their main plank on which they have worked with all the countries. Policies of China and India, as far as political leadership is concerned, have been very similar. We do not intervene or pass judgment on what kind of leadership is there. Because most of these countries, as you know, are Gulf monarchies or autocratic regimes. But then you do business with them. That's what it is going. We are not passing any value judgment. If they want to become democratic, the kind of democracy they want to bring about will have to be different than the kind of democracy we see in other countries, West or in India for that matter. But China today is the most important player in the region. And China is, when China signs an agreement with Iran, there are a lot of flutter around. And everybody thinks, oh, now Iran, they're going. But China is playing a long game, a big game. It has very important projects even in Israel. It has important projects in Arab, which are the allies of the US. So therefore, the Americans today are looking at a very different kind of a mix, how they can. Russia, on the other hand, has also begun one of the countries, important countries, which is trying to enter into the security domain as well. China has done security plus economy. The Russians are trying to. They have been part of the OPEC plus group in the oil sector and gas sector cooperation, whether it is the gas forum. So they are also back into the action. So you have all these powers. Then you have Turkey, a country which has ambitions of the Ottoman Empire and trying to come there. It has all these countries have also, I would say, have also weaponized their foreign policy. You know, they have become interventionists in other countries, seeing the bigger countries like America or China or other countries. So they are also following in the region in the same manner, whether it is in the Middle East itself or outside the Middle East in the Eastern Mediterranean. So Turkey today is going to be a very major challenge. Now, all four of them, whether you look at Iran, you look at Saudi Arabia, you look at Turkey, and you look at UAE, there are four different kind of models of Islamic leadership that is there. Shia, I spoke about Iran. I spoke about the Saudi Arabia being the custodian. Turkey has been supporting political Islam, Muslim Brotherhood. It has, and that was the reason that they had the problem with these countries. The Turkish army being a part of NATO, it's highly, smart army, a strong army, and they have a history of ruling a very large part. And then you have UAE. Now UAE does not have those same traits as the Saudi Arabia. So it has started working on tolerance, model of Islam, a moderate Islam. It has started keeping its world tolerance. It has started talking about more of the regions, the all communities. I mean, you know that Prime Minister Modi went there for the first time. They provided a piece of big land to India where for building a temple. The Pope visited there, and there he was given a state visit. So, which is what shows that they are all following very different kind of approaches. But of course, they are having a lot of internal problems. The last thing I would like to speak about is India's options now going forward. Of course, we are having bilateral relationship, and I would say today I have no hesitation in saying that uh, as a student of West Asia, that possibly Prime Minister Modi's most successful foreign policy objectives or achievements have been in the West. And that is extremely important, whether it is dehyphenation, whether it is strategic partnership. He is the only leader in the world, probably, who has been decorated by all the countries, including Palestine, for that matter. Highest decorations have been conferred upon him. So that is something that is. But then, apart from the personal, interpersonal relationship and the importance, you need to do something because you have to respond also and anticipate what is happening by what is going to be in China. We should not, we cannot sit and relax and let China take away what earlier Pakistan. China cannot do a Pakistan on us now at this time. That is why it's extremely important. Recently, you must have seen our foreign minister was in Israel, and he was there for the very long visit. That time, India was participating in the air show there, air exercises, and Israel is our defense and security partner, very strong partner, stands by us. But then a new quartet has come up, and that was something very interesting. I have been propagating always that we should have a trilateral cooperation. Now that Abraham Accords have been signed, India should move ahead with UAE, with Israel and India and try to work in Africa or elsewhere. That is the way that is we are looking at it. But now we had a quartet this time with US, UAE, and Israel and India. To use two eyes. And that is something that is in the economic domain, strategic economic domain, maritime security and trade. And so therefore it is trying to address a very major challenges that one faces in a more different nuance than the other quad, which we often talk about as a strategic and security dialogue. So while our security cooperation with all these countries has been growing, I think we have started working together in a bilateral, in a quadrilateral, in a trilateral. But I have one step forward, and that is that we need to, if we want to have a, a real say in the thing, if we want to, because see, in my view, China is going to be your real challenge, irrespective, wherever, whether in your immediate neighborhood or in your extended neighborhood in West Asia or elsewhere. It is going to be your biggest threat. It is going to be a biggest counterpoint. It is going to undermine your interest sooner or later. So we have to be prepared for that. And these countries are not in a position to choose between A or B because we are two countries are their biggest uh, importers of their oil and gas at the moment, and the investments can only go to these countries. So therefore, for them, from their national interest perspective, these India and China both are equally important for them. Perhaps China more so because China has a different kind of policy. Whereas P2P level, the relationship that India has is extremely good with these countries. Our people who are working there are well regarded. I would say that we have to also take a regional approach rather than simply a bilateral. And we have to learn to play a greater role because most of the countries in the region are trying to ask India to play a greater role. Every country has told us in bilateral or even in their own discourse that India today must stand and not only predicate it on Pakistan or China or what this one is doing or that one is doing. So we'll have to work on it. One last point I would like to say is the new dynamic is emerging, and I have tried to name it as something called cryptarch. Cryptarch is, in my view, you will follow, and I can explain later if you have time, but it is China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, Afghanistan, and Qatar. These countries are veering toward one grouping uh, out of issues that they are facing with US and with other countries and their own internal contradictions. So they are all coming together. If they come together, then it becomes a major challenge for India and, of course, for the other Sunni Arab countries. And so Turkey comes here, and you have all these. Plus, Iran has its own asymmetric outreach in different Arab countries in the world. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Today, you are seeing that the UAE and Syria are come once again close. Most of the Sunni Arab countries are showing great interest in bringing Syria to the fold, despite the Caesar Act. How the Americans are going to play around, like we have had problems in Iran because of the American sanctions. So we have to work together with Americans also so that they do not create a trust deficit for India in the region or it stunts our initiative. I think that this is a region in which things happen very fast. This is the region where we are seeing large turbulence happening. This is the region where there is a tremendous opportunity. Most importantly, it is extremely vital for our own good, our own sustenance, and our own national. So I'll stop here. And once again, thank you very much. And I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, sir. I think that was very, very comprehensive. And also, I think you flagged quite a few issues, including your last coinage of the SIP tax. I think it sounded very interesting. I'm sure the students will have many more questions to ask now. Maybe we will take a set of two or three questions and then you can answer them, sir, or you want to go one by one?
No, 2, 3 is good.
Can we pass on the mic, please? Yeah, here. Please introduce yourself and then ask the question. Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, sir. My name is Anil. I just have two questions. My first question was, when we speak about the station digital authority, how much does India calculate Egypt's role in this region, considering it does share a huge identified entity, but the job would be also one part of the project, and then how does Egypt primarily plays as well, considering its relations with Israel and South India? And secondly, I also
Actually, the voice is resonating, so I'm not able to hear.
Hold it closer.
is this one.
Professor, maybe you can repeat that for me.
Okay, she wants to know the role of the Arab identity, specifically the role of Egypt in the West Asian affairs, and how far it is able to affect the dynamics of India's relation with the West Asian states. What's your second question?
Financing this projects, right? Or we now see because people are upset over Hezbollah, and Hezbollah now sort of disintegrated in the region, and Iran is one of its proxies in Lebanon.
Okay. The second question is on state-sponsored terrorism with a specific reference to Hezbollah, Iran's support to Hezbollah. Now that Hezbollah is splitting and Hezbollah seems to have been having not a good time wherever it is, and there is a lot more popular resentment against them, will Iran be losing out a very important arm that they've used for a very, very long time in the region? How that will affect the regional dynamics is the second question, sir.
Can I answer
Sir,
this?
I think you can go ahead with these two questions, sir. By then we will collect the other ones.
Yeah, okay, right. So thank you very much. You know, that one time, as you know, the Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, these are the three countries which were the leaders of the Arab world for a very long time. And the Sadat and others, they had started of this Arab identity. This all came out of basically from the colonial experience. And this was very much working together. So Egypt got that leadership in the Arab world. But at the same time, over time, we have seen that Egypt, despite being a very big country, had become dependent on the Gulf monarchies to a great extent for its economic sake. And therefore, today, its role in the region remains a little bit subdued. And Egypt was also one of the first countries in the 70s to have normalized the relations with Israel, signed the peace treaty with Israel at the time. And despite that, we have seen that not much had happened between Egypt and today. Egypt has been once again trying to play a greater role, and it is trying to become a mediator today in many of. It has been very active in Libya. It has been very active now in Iraq and with Jordan and with other countries. So they are trying to once again develop certain new dimensions. As far as India is concerned, I mean, I felt earlier on, but today things have changed a great deal. And as our ambassador says, that it's more economic relationship than strategic. That's hopefully that will happen. But at one time, Egypt has also been competing with India for in the Arab world and outside. And Egypt remains a major contender from the African continent for a UN Security Council seat as well. So we have a lot of possibilities today as far as our economic collaboration is concerned. It's tremendous. We have very large number of Indian companies present in Egypt. They have invited Indian companies to participate in the expansion of their dams and the Suez Canal project. So there are a lot of possibilities, but as you know that it does not have great natural resources and has been rather dependent, even in foreign policy approaches, on the Gulf countries. So I think that its role is not commensurate to its size or its potential. It has one of the largest armies, no doubt, but that has only been seen in very near wars. Today, it is also having problems with Iran and Europe. As for Hezbollah, yeah, it's a very interesting question, because Hezbollah, as they say, has been fully supported and or at least owes allegiance to the Ayatollah, and therefore it works in tandem very much with the IRGC. The and has also been instrumental in fighting against the colonial bondage and in the problems. It has also become a major political force. And if you visit Lebanon, you will see as the large tract of the country is also controlled by them. You see the yellow flags all over, and they are run by this like the state. They have been part of formation of the government. And in that country, as long as you have the confessional uh, system of governance and participation of power, I do not foresee a great reduction in the influence of it. Hezbollah, of course, will transform. But as I said, that these are the groups which are marshals and they are martial, and they have politically motivated groups. They are not simply militant groups. So therefore, they are part of the government. They are part of the system. They have their ministers. So people, of course, today are very frustrated, the Lebanese, because it takes years before they can even form a government because of this very reason of the confession governance there. So I think that their influence, if it is reduced to some extent, I can see it if it happens in Syria, for example, where Iran is also again very important, but the Russians also to some extent play some parts, and they have recently even agreed with the Israelis that you can continue to take down some of these terrorist elements, and they are attacking on the Hezbollah side. So we are seeing that this is going to be a challenge for Hezbollah, no doubt. But whether it will be completely decimated, I don't think so. It's not possible because they are so well entrenched in their system today, despite the public decision.
Good morning, sir. Am I audible to you?
Yes, you have.
Yeah. So, sir, my name is Daksh Sharma. I'm a second year student at the department. So my question is related to one of the modules we're being taught about the nuclear component of geopolitics. So lately, there's been a nuclear shadow over the entire region. First with Iran, and now more recently Saudi Arabia. So how do you see, considering our module as well, that what's the future of nuclear technology, both civil and military in the region? And since the region is very, there's a plethora of non-state actors, how do you see the future of nuclear security in the region if the nuclear component or nuclear technology develops in the region? That's my question.
Yeah. Sir, I have another question from first year student of Geopolitics and International Relations, Mohimeen Khan. She asked, the threat of Israel's strike on Iran is currently growing. And what would be the impact of this on the signatories of the Abraham Accords? That's the other question. Janardhan of the first year also asks a question to you. Don't you think India should have more proactive role in the Mediterranean region by or with more engagements with the North African countries, seeing the Sino-Wahhabi nexus? That means essentially talking about Libya and many others acting in the region.
Very interesting questions, both. Well, as far as the nuclear component is concerned, so far the Middle East has been under the shadow of the Americans. They have been their security, arbitrary security provider. So they've been very much under their eyes and noses. We have seen Iran and Israel both acquiring the nuclear capacity. It is one of the, I would say, most volatile region in that sense. Like we have very often, everybody talks about nuclear war between India and Pakistan. They forget about China, but at the same time, between these regions, remains a major problem. Now, as far as is Saudi Arabia was concerned, it started off. It had an option earlier which it gave up, and now it wanted to once again acquire. UAE has also gone into the civil nuclear plant. Most Jordan is trying to do the civil nuclear plant. Most of these countries are planning now nuclear capability. Iran, at the same time, as you know, the JCPOA, this is a nuclear deal from which Trump had walked out, was basically to curtail and contain Iran's quest for a nuclear weapon. So Iran also has never openly claimed that it wants a weapon. It has always said that it wants to keep the option, and it is an NPT country, so it cannot violate, should not violate. But Trump's walking out of it has created a major problem. And that is why Biden is trying to get back to it. 29th November, as you know, the negotiations will restart in Vienna. And we hope that this will be, Iran could be. But my could be contained or could be persuaded to return. I mean, as they say, it's the Americans who have to return, not us. So the Europeans, the P5, the other countries, everybody wants the region to be not destabilized. Because see, it is not only between nuclear countries, even a traditional war in the region with missiles and others without using nuclear would be disastrous for the world, not only for the region. If anybody, and this also answers the next question, that if Israel attacks, now Israel has always used a clandestine manner of attacking before 1979. Israelis were instrumental in providing a lot of technologies to Iran. They were working on several projects, including civil nuclear projects. So this is not something that is you have seen that the Mossad has been accused of working and killing various nuclear scientists, trying to delay the nuclear program of Iran. That has been their strategy. Sometimes, I mean, it came too far that they had tried to take down the nuclear plants in Iran or attack them. Now, but what has happened is the Americans are not in favor. None of the Gulf countries is interested in a heightened engagement between Iran and Israel. So I don't think Israel will attack, not now, especially when you have a different kind of a regime, because under Netanyahu, there were a lot of these possibilities that were touted. He had opened publicly, also said it, and they are against the US return to this. But Israel also needs the USA more than USA needs Israel. So in order to stay there, now these Abraham Accord countries or Abraham Accord will continue to work as long as there is a blessing from the Americans into it. Of course, it is to the benefit of the regional countries like the UAE and the others. But if the street rises against it or revolts against it, you may have a bigger problem for the leadership, which may not be that popular as it is perceived to be outside. So it can create a another major problem. So my thinking is that there will be under the threshold attacks to one another's facilities, cyber warfare that will continue between Israel and Iran, as long as Israelis are not satisfied that Iran does not have the capacity to make it. Today, Iranians are also going through a tough phase, very bad phase, economically, pandemic-wise, and they are also equally keen to return to the nuclear deal, which will provide them a lot of benefits and possibly a time. You know, everybody needs time to grow. They want, especially, which is what is feared by Saudi Arabia and Iran and the UAE and Israel and the UAE, that they will get the time and in order to become far more strengthened. Today, Iran is a very major power in the region, and this is the only power that has the capacity to take on Israel. But in between all these countries, despite being Saudi Arabia is the biggest market for the US weapons. Despite having the biggest, you have seen the Houthis are able to drone by go and attack all the Saudi installations in the place. So I do not think that the Americans would allow. There was last time when there was such a project, I think the Americans were not on board, and that is why this was done by Israelis on their own, but not an attack, full say. But cyber attacks, yes. to destabilize or arrest the growth of nuclear program of Iran. But hopefully, I mean, my hope is from our perspective, it is very important that uh, this nuclear deal is restated so that we are not facing the sanctions against Iran, which are affecting our own uh, relationship with Iran and our connectivity to Central Asia. So it is extremely important from our point of view. So it is in our interest that JCPOA is revived. As far as the Mediterranean is concerned, yes, you are very right. I mean, when I mentioned about Triptych, now you have another option. Another option is that Abraham Accord countries, US, and India and some other countries in the North Africa. Libya, of course, today has already signed an agreement with Turkey. And Turkey is not in the Indian camp. As you know, Turkey is more with Pakistan than with India. And is a big challenge for us in theaters. And therefore, Turkey will remain on the opposite side. So what we India has done is we had a visit of our foreign minister to Greece, to Cyprus, and we have good relations with France and other countries in Europe, and therefore we could work together with them, maybe with Morocco, with other countries, the Mediterranean countries together, and India should play a much greater role in the Mediterranean, and I fully agree with
Sir, there is also another question on uh, how is Iran viewing the new Quad formation in West Asia? How will it affect the Indo-Iranian bilateral relationship? This is from Samanvai. There's also an interesting question on gender. This question says, with countries incorporating feminist foreign policy, is gender a component in India's foreign policy towards West Asia? Then the third question is, how can India and Iran converge in the Afghan crisis, considering that India hosted either the national security advisors or slash officials in November to discuss the security threats from Afghanistan?
excellent questions, I must say now. Well, as far as Iran and the new quartet is concerned, now since it does not have any real security component to it, Iran does. Can you hear me? Iran has not expressed any views on this per se, nor have many other countries, because see, it is said to be a kind of an open-ended project, more to an economic forum. It is being called as an economic forum, and I don't even treat it as a quad, but I think of it as a quartet, and it is bringing about synergies into different areas. But at the same time, as far as Iran is concerned, you know that probably in the last few months, our activities and discussions with Iran in the context of Afghanistan and in the bilateral context, in the context of Chabahar port, have been very, very frequent. The foreign minister had gone there before. He also went when Ibrahim Raisi was elected, even before he took over. He also went again during his ceremony of taking over as the president and had discussions with them. Iranians are very keen to continue to collaborate with India. They see India not only in the religious context, but also in the context of the big market. And they are also hoping that the sanctions will be over and then the situation can emerge. So somehow both the countries have behaved very maturely in the wake of the American sanctions, which were unilateral sanctions. So sometimes you want to say something. Our policy has been that we don't recognize the unilateral sanctions, but at the end of the day, seeing your own national interest and your own exposure, you have to take certain measures that may have an impact on this. This is precisely what happened with Iran as far as this was concerned. So I don't think that right now at this stage, Iran is very alarmed by the new quartet because it does not have a security impact. As far as feminist foreign policy towards India's feminist, if I understood correctly, it means that feminist factor in India's foreign policy. We are also talking about this feminist foreign policy in India itself. And I'm part of the two groups that are discussing this at the moment outside of the government. That's exactly how we can bring about. Today, the Indian diplomats are about 16%. Till now, we have not been able to have 30% or 33% representation in the parliament, irrespective of different kind of political parties coming to power. We have good track record in panchayats and others, but not as far as the parliament is concerned. So everything flows from that model. Now, if you want to introduce a feminist foreign policy, number one, you should have your own feminist foreign policy in the first place to be able to tell other countries. Secondly, you should also have value judgments on other countries, which is what India had never had in the first place, as far as what kind of regime, as I mentioned earlier, what kind of political governance models they have. Like Saudi Arabia has been very close partner of India, but in Saudi Arabia, it's only now that the women are able to even drive, or there are some other changes that are taking place in the region. So that is where I don't see that that has been an objective. But what India has done is an interesting thing. I mean, certain projects, for example, the training of women in Saudi Arabia in the ICT field. So, with the help of Wipro, if I remember correctly, or Tata's TCS, we had made these projects for the women only in Saudi Arabia. Those projects. So, India has been trying to provide assistance which are uh, female specific or oriented towards their engagement and developments, but it is not politically laden. So that is what I see at the moment. Well, India and Iran have been, as I said, uh, have been collaborating, and after the developments in Afghanistan, it has served Iran's policy to some extent because Iran also did not want Americans to be there, and uh, therefore it was seen that the Americans leave. But the way the Americans left has created a very major crisis in the region for Iran, and as well as for India, everybody else. Now, Iran is very keen in stabilizing Afghanistan. It has been working closely. It has hosted several Taliban leaders in the past. So it has channels to Taliban. But if you remember last time in 96, 95, 96, at that time, India also, Iran and Russia and the US were on the same side when they were trying to dislodge a fight against, as Northern Alliance, with the Northern Alliance against the Taliban. So this time, Iran very much is in the thick of things. India today does not have the kind of leverage it wanted. It had been participating in some meetings outside, uh, in the Troika Plus or otherwise. It has been invited by Qatar to participate in this. Taliban themselves have been asking India to be present. India has agreed to provide assistance of 50,000 tons of wheat, which is likely to go via Pakistan soon. In my view, we are the largest country which has contributed to the nation building in Afghanistan, the only country probably in the past 20. And somehow we are worried about the fate of it. But if you go by Taliban statement, the Taliban is not a monolith. You need to understand that there are many groups within that. Large number of them are pro-Pakistanis. Some are hobnobbing with China because they know that China is not bound by it. Plus, the largest economy, a strong country, can take much greater path. So, what we are trying to do now is talking to Iran, talking to Central Asian countries who are the neighbors, immediate neighbors of Afghanistan, have lent borders with them, with Russia, so that we can have some kind of a direct approach. And I think that Iran has been very, very forthcoming in this. And they are also looking at this as a possibility. Now, when you talk about China, Iran, or US, Iran, or other relations, you must also think that Iran, or maybe as a student, you must try to research whether civilizational countries believe in the strategic autonomy a little more than the other. That is something that is a question I think you must explore. And I always feel if you see the behavior of the countries which are religious, which have been civilizational, they are far more independent in their approaches towards the international politics of the country. So what Iran is looking at is close to China. China stood by it even during sanctions. It is also hoping to leverage the Chinese influence with with Indian parties. It is important for Chabahar, it is important for our connectivity, and therefore Afghanistan's stability is also important for India. For us, the biggest problem is Pakistan as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Taliban is not our problem.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the prolific lecture. I'm Gargi, second year student at the department. So, India is facing the national security threat in the form of Islamist terrorism in pockets of Kashmir and few other sections of the country. Also, unfortunately, India has witnessed a handful of its citizens joining certain terror groups in West Asia. My question is there any scope of cooperation between India, Israel, UAE, etc., in the domains of intelligence, counterterrorism, and anti-extremism, where India can benefit, or is there any existing framework that benefits us? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I have a few more questions as well.
Yeah.
This question is from a first year student by name Akil Ajit. His first question is, with growing rift between OPEC and oil consuming nations such as India, China, and US, they plan to release part of the Strategic Petroleum Reserves SPR to reduce oil prices. How will it affect India's bargaining power with OPEC countries? That is his first question. Second question is, with India's recent clean energy commitments and its progressive transition and Saudi Arabia's recent cancellation of the $15 billion deal between Aramco and Reliance, how will it impact India-Saudi Arabia relations? Our PhD scholar, Ms. Purnima, has three questions for you. One is directly pertaining to her PhD topic. She asks, how does India see the war in Yemen? Since you are part of the diplomatic circle and have been part of the government, what is the discussion like? Does India perceive a credible security threat due to Yemeni conflict for India? That's the first question. Second is, recently talks on West Asian Quad came up. If that were to materialize, what kind of role could India take? How is that arrangement expected to benefit India? Third question is, which is very, very recent, was in news yesterday and day before. While ISIS-directed attacks haven't taken place in India so far, what are the possibilities of ISIS-inspired attacks taking place in Indian soil? This is in special reference to the recent ISIS magazine, The Voice of Hind, that featured a demolished statue of a Hindu deity, which perhaps is very, very closely associated with this region. That's in a place called Murdeshwar. So this is the questions.
Thank you. Well, Islamic extremism, I would rather say extremism per se, whether Islamic or otherwise of any kind, is a major challenge and is a major challenge for any country. Unfortunately, you see the Islamic extremism coming out quite frequently in different theaters of war and different theaters of instability. We have seen the emergence of Al Qaeda, but just go back a little. In the wake of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, in our region, let's look at the Soviet Union, the Americans, the Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. They were involved in creating mujahideens, fighting against the Soviets, and then it turned into Taliban with the help of Pakistan, the ISI. Even continues till today, Haqqani network and other. The Al Qaeda prospered. We have seen that how Pakistan was sheltering many of them. Large number of groups are there in Pakistan. The state-sponsored terrorism is a reality, which is what not much is being done against it. Then the question is how to counter that. As far as the intelligence or operation between India, UAE, and Israel is concerned, we have various mechanisms under which we are working. We have the National Security Advisor Dialogue. We have bilateral dialogue. We have our agency to agency dialogue, and the information is being shared by the countries on these, whether it is terrorist groups, terror events, or even the taking action against them, you know, in concert. So there are many agreements. Very often they are not publicized, but I must say that intelligence sharing is an integral part of our relationship as a strategic partnership with the all West Asian countries, and more particularly with Israel and with UAE and Saudi Arabia as well. So we are doing that quite frequently. There are meetings at all levels. So we are fighting that. But Islamic extremism cannot be fought just by sheer intelligence. It is something that is far more. You have sleeper cells. You have countries like Pakistan, which are using uh, terrorism as an instrument of its foreign policy. And unless the countries we call out, but unless the other countries also call out and take action against that, it'll be very difficult to control terrorism of any kind anywhere. You'll be surprised that in the United Nations, when Prime Minister Modi went in 2015 to address that terrorism conference, I mean, not a single definition of terrorism has been agreed to. That is the problem. And FATF and all those kind of agencies we have seen working together. Then you have India tried this comprehensive convention on international terrorism. Most of the Western Asian countries at that time were not on board with that. They were believing in, because they were supporting one group or the other, one way or the other. You know that. Osama bin Laden was a Saudi, and 9/11, all of them were Saudi. So these countries have been involved in this themselves in supporting various groups, like Iran is today doing various proscribed groups in different parts of the world for political ends or for geopolitical influence. But at the same time, for the country which is targeted, it becomes a nemesis of sorts. I think that that is where, unless there is a global collaboration in this, cooperation in that by all countries, it is not possible to counter terrorism, radicalization, or extremism at any end. That's important, extremely important. Then there has been a change, as I mentioned earlier, in the various countries. Those who are benefactors of Pakistan and their approach have started to talk to Pakistan and tell them that it is not acceptable. Now that is something that might bear fruit in a while, but the bilateral dynamic between India and Pakistan will continue to have a problem for us. And that's where we come into the domain of Afghanistan related ISIS related. At one time, a few years ago, Al Qaeda said that we have opened an office in India. Then you have the ISIS Khorasan there. Taliban, you cannot have directly problem because Taliban wants to have its Islamic emirate within Afghanistan only. It is not looking at shores beyond the Afghanistan border. But the ISIS, whose objective is the Islamic Caliphate all over the world, wherever they can make it. And this is how it started. And that is what they are looking at. Now, whether the Taliban's victory in Afghanistan has created a major fillip to terrorist groups, extremist groups in India, yes, it could have. Because many of the groups, we have heard several of the even politicians talking that, oh, this is this kind of a group. If we could remove this, we could do that. And that's where the situation in Kashmir can be volatile. Well, say, if you were to see the Taliban that is talking to the world or trying to create some kind of a narrative, if you go by what they are saying or what they believe in, there is no direct threat from Taliban or other terrorist groups because they are at pains to tell the world that we will not allow Taliban. The Taliban does not have the capacity today, in my view, to control Al Qaeda or to control the ISIS Khorasan, which exists. And therefore, with the connivance of Pakistan and the Afghani group, part of Taliban, and the TTQ or other groups in Taliban, Pakistan, and others, it is quite possible that those groups which had earlier come, we have a history, can come onto our borders of great problems. Then you have internally, there are some people who are misaligned with the system, they are misled, and they are radicalized. So the radicalization could increase. That can cause a greater problem for India in that sense of the term. And that's where we need to have a comprehensive strategy within the country and a comprehensive strategy outside, which should be aligned in order to fight terrorism, whichever way we are able to do that. As far as OPEC and oil consuming countries, I have personally always believed that countries like India, China, Japan, Korea, and some others, Europeans, must have a similar kind of a cartel of consuming countries. that provides you a negotiability so that you can't be held hostage. It happened in 73, it had happened in 91, it is happening now. Every time we see that these countries use, because see, you can, from their perspective, possibly they want to get the best dollar that they need so that at, a, on an average, they don't lose out. That is something. Plus, problem with these countries have also become that America has emerged as the largest player in the field and is a big competitor. Therefore, OPEC plus means OPEC and Russia have this kind of an issue for India. Now, the Americans request to release the strategic petroleum reserves. India had agreed to do that, some 5 million barrels, but I don't know if it is. Hold on, because today morning news says that India might not be uh, releasing this strategic reserve, because we have to look at it from our national interest perspective. The oil prices have been very low for a long time, and it has impacted the economies of the major oil producing countries, especially in the Gulf. But today they are trying to, as it is, economies are growing, so the oil prices are growing as well. So consumption is growing, and so we can see that there is a conflict going on that. Relationship with Saudi Arabia on the green this thing corridor, and Saudi Arabia has taken the lead today. They had the Green Summit only last month, I think, or a month before. They are very keen, not only Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE. All these three countries are focusing a great deal on renewable energy. One of our largest plant, 1,000 megawatt plant that was produced by Sterling, an Indian company in UAE on the renewable, was with the help of a Saudi company and Indian companies. They work together. They are working in different parts of the world. Saudi Arabia has a very major plan in 2030. So, of course, the deals, when they are cancelled, they tend to have an impact. Now, some deals do not materialize for various reasons. And that is between the two countries and companies to work. But it, of course, eventually will come at the political table when we have the next Joint Commission meeting with Saudi Arabia, or we have a visit by their leaders, some other leader, as Minister of Petroleum, to go and discuss that what is the exact reasons, are these bridgeable? That is something that we look at. So that's quite possible. I think that this is a good. We will be able to. But if you come to think of it, in the Reliance, if you just Google it, you will find that over $220 billion have been invested by Saudi Arabia in Reliance Jio and other areas also during the pandemic in last 1 year. So that is also simultaneously going on there. They are also interested in the 5G platforms, working with Reliance in India. And that is simultaneously continuing. Yemen actually is a disaster. Unfortunately, we had very good relations. We had good we had 8 oil blocks there. It's been historically close to India for trading purposes, ports, and we have about 100,000 Indians lived there in Yemen, and we had about 100,000 who were brought by Nizam of Hyderabad, and they became Indianized totally. Some of their actors also belong to that. So I feel that the Yemen is the biggest tragedy, and why it happened is also another uh, thought that probably you must try to explore, and that is in 2015 when the Americans were signing this agreement with Iran, going closer. Obama administration was getting closer to it. Saudi Arabia was extremely unhappy about it. And in order to flex its muscles in the region that we are the power, we cannot do, we are your largest buyers, we are investors in the US. Most of the sovereign wealth funds are invested in the US. So that's another thing. So they are now, then that's when they took Raj and went after the Houthis. It became a Iran versus a Saudi Arabia conflict. It is a human disaster, a tremendous tragedy. We were able to evacuate a lot of people via Djibouti and other places, including in the early stages. India maintains that this dialogue which is going on currently uh, uh, between Saudi Arabia's supported government of Hadi and the Houthis, with the help of Oman, must succeed, and so that they are able to. Americans are also very keen on stopping this war. Their special envoy has been traveling. I think from India's perspective, it is a unnecessary war. Right? I mean, that is what I feel. And I think that the Indian government in its bilateral to Saudi Arabia gets briefed often of exactly what the situation. Iranians brief us on that. Iranians, of course, say that we are not a part of it, but we can have some leverage. They are meeting the Saudis. So hopefully there will be a little bit of a positive traction over time. But today, of course, it is in a batch. As far as West Asia and uh, quartet in India, I mean, if I did not answer this question before, I thought I answered. But this quartet, as I said, is an economic forum. It is a new entity, and India is part of many entities. Like the BRICS, the other countries, the other groups. So there's a crisscross of various objectives. But is it? Can it turn into a political grouping uh, in or join other Quad or other groups, Sunni groups or something like that within the thing when the China-led group emerges? There is a possibility, but India will have to then take a call, which at the moment I think is too premature to say whether which side we will take. But for the economic engagement, for finding various several projects have been identified actually in the cybersecurity area, in the area of third countries, whether we can work together in Africa in the agriculture sector with the technologies, the defense sector. The countries are working together to production, not exchanges, because for that there are other bilateral mechanisms that are working. But in the economic area, their number first meeting of the joint secretary level officers has to be held in Dubai. Thereafter, it will be followed by the meeting of the foreign ministers. They are trying to work out exactly which areas they will be focused. My view is that it will be more on agriculture, more on health services, more on high technology, and something to do with artificial intelligence and defense cooperation jointly. So, on the ISIS inspired, I already mentioned that ISIS, not the victory of Taliban in that way, and the ISIS has been able to hit the Taliban targets themselves in the last few weeks that we have seen, and it is causing a major problem. And in India, these sleeper cells, there are partially radicalized groups, and so I mean, as I said, that there has to be a comprehensive strategy within the country. You cannot have Islamophobia and then deal with it. It is not possible. We have to be comprehensive in this approach. It has to be an integrative approach. Then only it can succeed. Because radicalization and de-radicalization are two things. I was in Jordan. I can give you an example. There, the state was very much in concert with the mullahs, Maulvis, everybody together. King himself had given his Aman message, treated the terrorists as takfiris, went after them against ISIS when one of their pilots were burnt alive. So they've been fighting with them. But about 5,000 Jordanians were fighting with the ISIS. Now, when they come back with certain ideology, and that ideology can be disastrous for a country that want to follow a moderate Islam. In India, one more thing I have not probably touched upon it, but I think that for far too long, especially with West Asia, we have not leveraged our Islamic credential and allowed only Pakistan to play the game. But that, in my view, was something that could have been done in a much
Uh, Thank you, sir, for the presentation. I'm Vasu Sharma, a second year postgraduate student at the department. My question is regarding certain form of intelligence sharing and cooperation on the same field. So we know that terrorism is a threat that is emanating from the region. But from 2017 to 19, we witnessed that there have been several deportations from UAE to India, especially precisely of individuals like Abu Jindal and Niki Joseph. So my question is such sort of cooperation only limited to UAE? And second thing, what are the challenges for India to have such form of cooperation with other countries in the region? Yeah, thank you, sir.
The challenge now, I don't see there is any more challenges at the moment. The challenge was there before, as I said. And I mentioned that as when we become strategic partners, we have signed these agreements. Now, those countries are also looking at the cost benefit analysis for them. Whether it is good to, earlier, everybody used to run away to Dubai. Started off with 93 when Dawood Ibrahim went there and he was operating his empire from there. Uh, then you had Farooq Taklabu, Jindal, and all these people, plus economic offenders in the Augusta case. So it has been very quick. We have seen that not only from here, but from Saudi Arabia also, where it was very difficult to get anybody earlier. But today, Saudi Arabia, anybody caught India makes the request, they very quickly try to transfer that. It is in these countries, decision making is much faster. So when they see the cost benefit analysis, they are doing. So as long as India remains important for them, and this is what I think now today that is the case. I don't see that is going to be a major problem now. But of course, intelligence sharing is very important. One small thing I can tell you about this: in 2008 or 9, we came to know that there were 4 offenders who were in one particular place in a neighboring country. And when we shared that information, they shared that information with the offenders, and the offenders were, when our teams went, there were nobody there. That has changed tremendously. I see that this is a good change that has taken place between India and West Asia in general, and India and the Gulf countries in particular. Unmute yourself. Unmute.
Good afternoon to all. It is my privilege to deliver the vote of thanks for this special lecture on the behalf of the department. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to former Ambassador Anil Trigunayat for interacting with us and for providing valuable insights on the topic India's foreign policy toward West Asians. Ambassador Anil spoke about the challenges and complications emanating from the region, especially the religious and sectarian conflicts, and how it affects India's relation towards West Asian states. Ambassador Anil also spoke about the challenges India faced in the past due to hyphenation of relations, the influence of Pakistan, and the Islamic factor. Ambassador Anil mentioned about the positive changes made with the relation to West Asian states post 2014 after the coming of Modi government. Finally, Ambassador Anil talked about India's options in the future and some concerns that can further complicate India's relation with West Asian states, especially due to the growing influence of China and Turkey. Thank you once again, sir, for sparing your time and sharing your knowledge on this important topic. I would also like to thank the head of the department, Dr. Nandakishore, for moderating this session and for providing guidance for the conduct of this event. I would like to thank Dr. Anand for organizing and coordinating this special lecture. Finally, I would like to thank the audience and students of the department for being part of this event and keeping this session interactive. This webinar has indeed been a great learning experience to all, and we look forward to have many more such events in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best to you all.
Thank you, sir. I think when I spoke, the mic was off. He's Arun Matthew, a second year master student. And thank you for your patience, sir, in answering all the questions. I'm sure there are many more questions, and some of them are still getting used to this pattern. And physically, if you were here, they would have surrounded and they would have asked you many more questions. But nevertheless, we hope that we get an opportunity to interact with you again. And that can be a much better occasion and much more meaningful occasion than this one. It will certainly make more value to it as we are working towards a center for West Asia and North Africa. So probably we'll certainly be able to have you here if everything goes well. Once again, on behalf of the department, I thank you profusely for accepting our invitation and looking forward to having you here, sir. Thank you. Take care, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. Pleasure.